shimmered in an iridescent sheen, and strange symbols adorned its frame. It looked almost organic in nature, like it had grown from the very fabric of space itself. The pod drifted aimlessly, caught in the gravitational pull of a nearby asteroid field, its engines long since dead. Elias's curiosity got the better of him. His gut told him this wasn't some abandoned cargo. He approached cautiously, bringing the Vanguard close enough to latch onto the pod. He had no idea what he was about to get into, but there was something about the situation that felt important. He reached for the pod's hatch, tapping a few commands on his console. The pod responded with a faint hum, and the hatch slowly creaked open. Inside, Elias was met with a sight he would never forget. A child. The boy was unconscious, his small frame curled up in the corner of the pod. He looked human at first glance, but there was something distinctly alien about him. The pale skin that glowed softly, the sharp features, the odd markings across his face. Elias's heart raced. This was no ordinary child. The pod he was in clearly belonged to someone important. Elias quickly moved to assess the situation. The boy's pulse was weak, and he showed signs of being in stasis for far too long. It was clear the child had been in some kind of cryogenic sleep, a life-saving measure for space travelers. But the pod's systems had failed. Elias couldn't tell if the boy was alive or dead, but he had to try. "Come on," Elias muttered to himself, shaking the boy gently. "Stay with me." He worked quickly, pulling out medical supplies from the ship's first aid kit and using the few tools he had to stabilize the boy. The Vanguard wasn't equipped for advanced medical care, but it was all he had. After a tense few minutes, the boy finally stirred, his eyes fluttering open. At first, the boy seemed disoriented, staring at Elias with wide, fearful eyes. Elias spoke to him gently, using simple words, though he knew they wouldn't understand each other. "You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." The boy blinked, his alien eyes scanning Elias, then looking around the pod. Elias wasn't sure what the boy was feeling, but he could see the panic slowly fade. Still, there was a strange wariness in the child's gaze. Elias couldn't blame him. They were both strangers in this vast, empty space. Elias gave a reassuring smile, though the boy likely couldn't understand it. "Don't worry. I'm getting us out of here." The boy's lips parted slightly, and then he spoke in a language Elias didn't recognize. The words were soft, melodic, yet laced with a sense of urgency that Elias couldn't ignore. He shook his head, not understanding, but he did his best to convey his intentions through simple gestures. "Stay calm," Elias said, reaching for the comms to signal the ship's AI.
"We need to get out of here fast," the AI responded with a neutral tone. "Warning, unknown ship signatures detected."
"Recommend evasive maneuvers." Elias froze, his heart skipping a beat. He turned to the boy, who seemed to recognize the change in atmosphere. His wide eyes widened further, a flicker of recognition or fear flashing across his face. "Who's after us?" Elias muttered, glancing out into the stars. It didn't take long for him to find the answers. Several ships were heading directly toward them, their markings unmistakable. They weren't random scavengers. These were military vessels, ships that belonged to a powerful faction within the galaxy. Elias quickly calculated their trajectory. They were closing in fast. If he didn't act soon, he would be trapped. "We're in trouble, kid," he said, gripping the controls. "Hold on tight." With his heart pounding in his chest, Elias activated the Vanguard's engines, sending the ship into a wild, erratic course through the asteroid field. He knew the risks, but he had no choice. The enemy ships were fast, but Elias had spent years navigating treacherous fields like this. It was his only chance. The boy remained silent but clutched the seat, his wide eyes fixed on Elias as the ship jolted and twisted, narrowly avoiding asteroid collisions and dodging enemy fire. Elias could feel the tension building, the pressure of the situation mounting with every passing second. Whoever was after the boy clearly didn't want him found. But why? And why was Elias, of all people, being pulled into this mess. The part ends with Elias making a desperate decision to jump to a safer part of space, hoping the boy's mysterious origins would offer some clue to his purpose, and perhaps his safety. Elias had never been in a situation quite like this. Space was a dangerous place, and while he'd navigated through asteroid fields and barely escaped hostile forces before, this felt different. The boy, this mysterious alien child, wasn't just another piece of cargo. He was something far more valuable, and Elias didn't yet know why.
The Vanguard rocked again as the enemy ships drew closer.
The shaking of the ship was jarring, but Elias had learned long ago to ignore the panic that rose in moments like these. Instead, his mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. The boy, still sitting in the pilot's seat beside him, looked wide-eyed at the flashing lights and the shaking metal. Elias could see his fear, but he had to stay calm. They both had to.
"We're almost out of here,"
Elias muttered under his breath as he yanked the controls. His hands worked the buttons and levers instinctively, but his heart was beating too fast. He had to find a way to lose these ships, and fast. His ship was older, not as fast as those military vessels. He knew that if it came to a direct fight, the Vanguard wouldn't stand a chance. The boy spoke again, his words unclear, but the urgency was obvious. Elias glanced at him briefly, noticing how the child's gaze was fixed on the view outside the cockpit. For a moment, Elias wondered if the boy understood more than he let on. "Hold on," Elias said, gripping the controls tighter. He saw a narrow gap between two asteroids ahead. It was risky, but it was the only shot he had. The boy didn't flinch. He simply held onto the seat, watching the chaos unfold. Elias pulled hard on the thrusters, steering the ship toward the gap in the asteroid field. The ship groaned as it fought against the gravitational pull of the nearby asteroids, but Elias was used to this. Weaving through tight spots was his specialty. His heart skipped a beat as the Vanguard barely scraped the side of a massive asteroid, the sound of metal scraping against rock ringing through the ship. He focused on the space ahead, calculating the best route. He could see the enemy ships now, closing in on them, and he knew he didn't have much time. His hands flew over the controls, adjusting the ship's trajectory to avoid incoming fire. A blast struck the Vanguard's hull, sending a jolt through the ship. Elias cursed under his breath, checking the damage. The shields were holding, but for how long? The enemy wasn't letting up. "We can't keep this up," Elias said, talking more to himself than to the boy. "I need a way out, fast." He glanced over at the boy again. The child had stopped speaking, but there was something in his eyes now, something that made Elias pause. The fear had lessened, replaced by a strange calmness. The boy's eyes met Elias's, and for the first time, Elias felt like the child wasn't just some helpless passenger. There was a sense of purpose in the boy's gaze, something that suggested he might know more about what was going on than Elias did. Elias had no time to dwell on it. He twisted the ship's controls once more, sending the Vanguard into another tight turn. The ships behind them were closing in faster now, firing relentlessly. Elias could hear the whine of the ship's shields as they took another hit, and the strain of the ship under the pressure made him wince. But then, something unexpected happened. The boy's hand shot out, pressing against the cockpit window as he stared at one of the enemy ships that was leading the charge. His eyes glowed briefly, a soft light emanating from them, and Elias felt a strange shift in the air. Without warning, the pursuing ships veered off course, scattering in different directions as if they had lost their target. Elias stared at the display in disbelief. The enemy ships were no longer focused on them. They were leaving. Elias didn't know what had just happened, but he didn't question it. He kept the ship steady, easing up on the throttle as the immediate danger passed. He glanced over at the boy, whose hand had dropped back to his side. The child was silent, but his eyes were fixed on the screen ahead, as if watching something only he could see.
"What did you do?" Elias asked, his voice low. The boy didn't answer.
He just tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the question but offering no response. Elias was left in stunned silence. Whatever just happened, it had saved them. He didn't understand it, but it was clear that the boy was no ordinary child. There was power within him. Power Elias couldn't even begin to comprehend. Elias checked the ship's systems quickly, ensuring there were no more immediate threats. The enemy ships were retreating, and they had a brief moment of peace. He allowed himself to relax for just a second, but it didn't last long. He knew they weren't out of danger yet. The boy had just used some kind of ability to get them out of that jam, but there were still unknowns, and Elias had no idea who might be looking for this child, or why. But one thing was certain, he couldn't let the boy out of his sight.
Not now. All right, Elias said, looking at the boy once more.
Let's get you home. The boy didn't react, but Elias noticed the faintest flicker of something in the child's expression. It wasn't a smile, but there was an almost imperceptible shift in his demeanor. It was as if, for the first time, the boy felt a little safer. Elias set a course for the nearest human colony, hoping to get some answers. But as they traveled, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, it seemed like something was lurking just beyond the stars. He could almost feel the eyes of whoever was pursuing them, waiting for their next move. The journey to the colony was long, and Elias spent the time reflecting on what had happened. He wasn't sure what kind of danger he had just escaped, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the stakes were far higher than he had initially imagined. He had to protect the boy. He had to figure out what was going on, and he had to do it quickly. He wasn't a soldier or a diplomat. He was just a salvage pilot. But this boy was in his care now, and Elias would do whatever it took to keep him safe. As they neared the colony, Elias couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. The boy had already shown power beyond anything Elias had seen in his years of exploring the galaxy. But the real question was, who would come looking for him next, and why? Elias couldn't answer those questions, but he knew one thing for certain. The adventure had only just begun. Elias had spent most of his life alone in space. As a salvage pilot, he was used to being on his own, far from the bustling worlds and the politics of the galaxy. But now, with the boy on his ship, things had changed. There was a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on Elias's chest. The boy had proven to be more than just an innocent child. There was something powerful inside him, something Elias couldn't yet understand, and he needed answers. The journey to the nearest human colony wasn't short, and Elias used the time to think about what had happened, the enemy ships that had chased them, the way they suddenly scattered when the boy did something, and the strange, calm power in the child's eyes. Elias had a feeling the boy wasn't just a refugee. The way he had reacted, almost instinctively, made it clear that his presence in the galaxy wasn't a coincidence. Elias looked over at the boy. The child was quiet as always, sitting in the corner of the cockpit, watching the stars pass by. His pale eyes were wide with curiosity, but there was something else behind them. A deep, old sadness that Elias couldn't quite place. The boy was still so young, but the experiences he must have gone through had made Elias wonder about his past. What had brought him to that escape pod, drifting alone in the vastness of space? The boy hadn't spoken much since they first met, only the few words he'd said when they were evading the enemy ships. But Elias had picked up on small gestures, the way the boy would tilt his head when something interested him, the way he would sit quietly, observing everything around him. It was as if the boy was watching, learning, and absorbing everything without saying a word. Elias cleared his throat and turned his attention back to the controls. The colony was just ahead, a small outpost on the edge of human space. It wasn't much, just a place for miners and traders to rest, refuel, and gather supplies. Still, Elias hoped they could find some answers there. If anyone knew anything about the boy, it would be the people in charge of the colony. Maybe they had seen something, or heard rumors about strange events in the sector. As they approached the colony, Elias felt a strange sense of unease. The Vanguard wasn't exactly a ship designed for docking at official stations, and he wasn't sure how the colony would react to his unannounced arrival. But he had no choice. They couldn't keep running forever. The docking bay loomed in front of them, and Elias guided the ship toward it, his mind racing. He had to think about how to keep the boy safe, if anyone on the colony recognized him, if they knew who he really was. Would they try to take him away? Elias knew they wouldn't let him just walk out of there with the child. The ship's hull scraped against the docking platform with a loud screech. Elias winced but didn't say anything. He powered down the engines, then turned to the boy. "We're here," he said softly, trying to sound reassuring. "Stay close to me, okay?"
"Don't wander off!"
The boy glanced at him, his eyes wide with uncertainty. Elias smiled gently. He wasn't sure if the boy understood, but he hoped the child could sense the sincerity in his voice. Elias wasn't sure what he was walking into, but he wasn't about to let anything happen to the boy. As the hatch opened, the bright lights of the colony greeted them. The air was thick with the smell of industrial equipment and recycled air. Elias took a deep breath, adjusting to the change. The colony was bustling with activity, miners and traders moving about, exchanging goods and stories. The hum of machinery and voices filled the air. Elias made his way down the narrow corridor, the boy following silently behind him. The station wasn't very large, but it was busy. People from all walks of life came here for supplies and rest, but it was also a place where secrets could be hidden, where rumors spread quickly. Elias had to be careful. He couldn't let anyone know who the boy really was. Not yet. They approached a small bar near the edge of the docking bay, a place where travelers gathered to share drinks and gossip. Elias hoped he could find some information here. He noticed the bartender, a gruff-looking man with a thick beard and tattoos on his arms, wiping down the counter. The man glanced up as Elias and the boy walked in. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked, his voice low and gravelly. Elias hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Just a drink," he said, "and some information if you've got any." The bartender raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Elias took a seat at the bar, keeping an eye on the boy, who stood quietly next to him. Elias wasn't sure if the boy understood what was going on, but he could tell that the child was on edge. His eyes were scanning the room, as if looking for something, or perhaps someone. "What's got you so interested in information?" the bartender asked, pouring a drink for Elias. "Ain't no big news around here, just the usual rumors and gossip." Elias took a slow sip from his drink, then leaned in closer to the bartender. "I'm looking for a kid," he said quietly. "A young one." "You ever heard any stories about a child who doesn't belong here? Maybe someone who's different from the rest?" The bartender eyed him carefully, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Elias thought the man might just brush him off. But then the bartender leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Yeah," the bartender muttered. "I've heard talk." "But you don't want to get involved with that. People who ask questions like that, they don't tend to last long around here." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" The bartender shrugged. "You didn't hear it from me, but there's been some strange stuff going on. Some ships coming through, strange signals, and rumors of things. People disappearing. No one knows what's really going on. But there's a lot of folks who are scared. And if you're asking about some kid, well..." He leaned back, looking around the room, as if checking for someone. "You might want to watch your back." Elias's stomach tightened. He didn't know if the bartender was trying to scare him, or if he was genuinely concerned. But Elias didn't like the feeling in the pit of his stomach. The boy, whatever he was more than just a lost child. There was something bigger happening, and Elias was caught in the middle of it. "Thanks," Elias said, his voice tight. "I'll be going now." The bartender nodded, and Elias stood, motioning for the boy to follow him. As they walked out of the bar, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The station was quiet, but the whispers of danger were everywhere. It was only a matter of time before someone found out about the boy, and when they did, Elias wasn't sure if he could protect him. As they made their way back to the ship, Elias couldn't help but wonder what kind of people were after the boy. And why. The enemy ships, the strange power the boy had shown, the rumors in the bar. It was all connected. But how? The boy's soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "I'm scared," the boy said in broken, soft tones, his eyes looking up at Elias. Elias glanced down, his heart softening. "I know," he said gently.
"But I'm here, and I won't let anyone take you."
The boy gave a small, unsure nod, and Elias led him back to the ship. He didn't have all the answers, but for now he would do everything in his power to keep the boy safe. The Vanguard sat quietly in the docking bay, its engines silent, waiting. Elias paced the small cabin, his mind racing with what he'd learned. Or rather, what he hadn't learned. The boy, the mysterious child who had changed everything, was still an enigma. Despite the brief moments of connection, Elias still couldn't fully understand who or what the boy was. But one thing was certain: whoever was after him wasn't going to stop until they got him. Elias turned to the boy, who was sitting quietly in the corner, his small figure curled up on the bench. The boy had been silent for most of the journey, staring out the viewport at the distant stars. His expression was calm, but Elias could see the worry in his eyes. It was a kind of quiet fear, a fear that Elias knew all too well. But the boy never spoke of it. He didn't need to. His every movement, every glance, was enough to show Elias that there was more going on beneath the surface. "Are you hungry?" Elias asked, trying to break the silence. He didn't know if the boy understood the question, but he couldn't just sit in silence forever. The boy didn't respond right away, but he nodded slightly after a moment. Elias smiled gently and moved toward the small food prep station in the corner of the cabin. It was nothing fancy, just rations and packaged food. But it would have to do. He set about heating the food, his thoughts drifting back to what the bartender had said. People disappearing. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone or something was always just one step behind them. The uneasy feeling had been growing stronger with each passing day. And now, in the quiet of the ship, it seemed to echo louder than ever. The boy's voice broke through his thoughts again. "I don't want to go back," the boy whispered, his words almost too quiet to hear. Elias froze, his hand hovering over the food tray. He turned to look at the boy, who was now looking down at the floor, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "You don't want to go back where?" Elias asked, his voice soft. The boy lifted his eyes to meet Elias's gaze, his expression filled with a kind of pain Elias couldn't quite understand. "To them," he said, his voice shaking slightly.
"They will make me change."
Elias felt a sharp tug at his heart. He didn't know who the boy was talking about, but he could guess. He'd seen the signs before, people being taken, experimented on, used for reasons they didn't understand. The galaxy was filled with such stories, and Elias knew all too well how easily someone could be manipulated or controlled. "You don't have to go back," Elias said firmly, setting the food aside and crossing the room to sit beside the boy. "I'll keep you safe." "I won't let anyone take you." The boy's eyes softened, a flicker of relief passing through them. Elias could see the trust in his gaze, but there was also fear. The boy wasn't just afraid of what would happen if they were caught. He was afraid of something much deeper, something from his past. "I don't want to be changed," the boy whispered again, his voice barely audible. Elias didn't know what the boy meant by that. But he knew one thing. Whatever the boy had been through, it had left a mark on him, a mark that Elias wasn't sure how to heal. The boy wasn't just a refugee. He was someone who had been shaped by forces beyond his control, and Elias couldn't help but wonder just how deep those scars went. "I promise," Elias said softly, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder.
"We'll figure this out together. You're safe with me."
The boy didn't respond, but his body relaxed slightly, the tension easing from his shoulders. Elias felt a quiet sense of pride. For all his confusion, for all his uncertainty, he had made the boy feel safe. That was something, at least. The silence stretched between them for a few moments before the boy spoke again.
"They will come for me,"
he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty.
"They won't stop."
Elias nodded slowly, taking in the boy's words.
He didn't know who they were, but he didn't need to.
He had seen enough in his time to know that some things, some people, would never stop. They would keep coming, relentless and unforgiving, until they got what they wanted.
"We'll be ready,"
Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "Whatever it takes." The boy nodded slightly, but Elias could see the doubt in his eyes. He knew that deep down, the boy was afraid. They weren't ready. But Elias wasn't going to let fear rule them. He had to believe that together they could face whatever came next. As the minutes passed, Elias went back to the food prep, plating a simple meal for both of them. The boy didn't need much, just picking at the food, but it was enough. Elias knew they needed to keep their strength up, especially if they were going to outrun whatever was hunting them. Once they had eaten, Elias began to prepare the ship for takeoff again. He couldn't stay in the colony too long. The longer they lingered, the more likely someone would notice them, the more likely someone would come asking questions. They needed to leave, to keep moving, but he had no idea where to go. He had no plan, no destination in mind. All he knew was that he had to get the boy out of here, far from whoever was chasing them. The boy stood silently, watching Elias as he worked. His small form was barely visible in the dim light of the cabin, but Elias could feel his eyes on him. The boy didn't speak, but Elias could sense his restlessness. The boy, like Elias, was waiting for something to happen, waiting for the next move.
"Stay close,"
Elias said as he strapped himself into the pilot's seat. He glanced over at the boy.
"We'll be all right?" The boy nodded, moving to sit on the bench again. His eyes never left Elias, his gaze filled with both trust and fear.
Elias could see that the boy wanted to believe him, wanted to trust him. But Elias wasn't sure if he could keep that promise. The galaxy was vast, and dangers lurked in every corner. No matter how much he wanted to protect the boy, there was no guarantee he could. As Elias powered up the Vanguard's engines, the hum of the ship filled the cabin, steady and reassuring. He set a course, not knowing exactly where he was going, but determined to keep moving. The boy was silent as they lifted off, the stars stretching out before them. For a brief moment it felt like they were alone in the universe, just the two of them, free to go wherever the stars would take them. But deep down, Elias knew it wouldn't last. They would have to face whatever was hunting the boy, eventually. And when they did, Elias would need to be ready. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Elias couldn't stop now. Not when the boy was depending on him. Not when there was still hope.